It's practically a rite of passage to damage something on your trombone. In the company of brass players, having a dent, scratch, or full-on horror story attached to your instrument feels almost required. But after you're done crying or working your way through all 5 stages of grief, what do you actually do when you break your slide? Welcome back to another episode of the Bonecast. I'm your host, Gracie Westergaard, where we talk all things trombone with the people who love it most. Today's episode dives into what to do when you accidentally damage your trombone slide. What's fixable, what's not, and how to keep small problems from turning into big ones. To help us out, we're joined by repair tech Mick Geronimo. So, Mick, before we get into discussing slide damage, I'd love to start with a little background. How did you first get into instrument repair?
Full disclosure, I'm not doing instrument repair per se these days. I do some here and there for friends. But when I was doing instrument repair, I was at a place called Wally's Music. They did repairs and had other accessories and whatnot. The majority of what I did was school instrument repairs. And then, a lot of the community players and some pro players. And every once in a while, a big name would come through and they need a repair. But I would say a good 60% was like school instruments. So basic repairs, everything from adjusting woodwinds, floating pads, to doing dent work, to full restoration of instruments.
And, whenever Wynton Marsalis decides to stop by.
After I left instrument repair during COVID, it was just weird times. I had some other jobs, and then I got a call from Monette, and I don't know if you know who Dave Monette is, and Monette trumpets, but Wynton Marsalis plays a Monette. So I got a call from Dave Monette, and he was looking for somebody to work at his shop, and so I went in and got the job and met Wynton Marsalis for the second time, because actually I was his chauffeur when I was at Davis.
Wait, what?
He was playing a concert. This would have been like 89. And I was a music major. And so one of the people in the office came to me and said, "You're a trumpet player. Would you like to drive Wynton Marsalis around when he comes to school?" I said, "Yeah, sure." I remember a couple things vividly. I went to pick him up at his hotel, and his bus was just pulling in. So he rolls out of his bus and introduced myself, and he says to me, "Where am I and what am I doing today?" And in that instant, it's like, oh yes, this is the life of a traveling musician. It was a very surreal sort of a day. But then when I met him again working at Monette, he's going around shaking everybody's hand, saying hi. And he came to me, and I was about to say, "I met you once before." And he said, "We've met before, haven't we?" He didn't know the specifics, but he knew that we had interacted before. So it was very cool.
Oh, that's really sweet. And kind of surreal, like you said. A little sad, too, that he didn't really know where he was going that day until you told him.
Exactly. In the back of my mind, I was like, okay, yeah, that's a traveling musician. I'm not sure if I'm ready for this kind of a lifestyle. Not that I was good enough to do that, but that it was a very different lifestyle.
Well, it's a good thing you didn't go out on the road because you've helped so many people by repairing instruments. How did you initially get into this line of work?
Well, I had been working some administrative positions, and then my partner at the time, we decided to open up a business. We were doing some video post-processing stuff, and the economy wasn't really good at the time. Ever since going into college, I'd played music all my life, but I never wanted to make music my job because I didn't want it to be work. I wanted to just enjoy whenever I play. But then I reconnected with an old friend of mine, and he had become an instrument repairman. I was able to visit his shop and talk to him about things. I was like, oh, what about repairing? That might be an interesting thing. And I started looking into what that would entail and realized it was a way for me to be music adjacent without having the grind of performing. I was able to play instruments all day and be in the community. It was a great job in that respect.
That's wonderful. And like you said, you could stay connected to music without losing your love for playing, which is something a lot of people struggle with when it becomes their job. So, this episode is centered on trombone slides, but I know you've worked on a ton of different instruments. What was the first instrument you actually worked on?
When I decided to go into instrument repair, I wound up going to Renton Technical College. There were, at the time, just 3 schools in the US that taught instrument repair. Technically, while I was at school, I did repad my sax. So that was kind of the first big job. But I think for that, and probably for most repairmen, adjusting a clarinet is like one of the early instruments for most people because it's a fairly simple instrument. It doesn't have too many complex regulations that you have to deal with. One key operating many other things. And for the first 3 months, I adjusted clarinets and I adjusted only clarinets.
That's really funny, but sounds really monotonous. As a brass player, woodwinds totally intimidate me. There are so many mechanisms, and look, my trombone is just a tube. When I see a cornet disassembled with all the pads and screws laid out on a bench, I just think, how does anyone know where anything goes?
That's very true. But a trombone, I mean, even though it's just basically 4 tubes that need to work together, there is a lot of complexity in making that happen.
Absolutely, that's a good way of looking at it. Now, I know a lot of your repair work was handling tons of school instrument repairs, especially during the summer. What were some of the most common student created problems you saw?
Mostly general grossness. Not that that's necessarily damage, but that can lead to other damage if it's not attended to. People sword fighting with trombone slides, that sort of thing. Dents here and there. And I remember there's this one, and it looked like the kid had taken his mouthpiece and was just hammering all over.
So, when you open a trombone case and start evaluating the slide, what's the first step? How do you approach diagnosing it?
I will sort of look over it, see if there's any obvious dents, testing the water key, and you see if there's compression. As you're pulling the inner slides out of the tube, if you hold it vertically and just lift it up slowly, if everything is pretty parallel, it'll just come straight out. But if, say, the inners are out, when it comes out, it'll go ring. And then check the stockings, see if there's any damage on those. And then just run it through a few times to see if I can feel any hitches or hiccups or rough patches.
I know on the inner slides, it's sometimes hard to see dents. I can feel one before I can spot it. How do you approach repairing those tiny pinprick dents?
If you put the tube over the mandrel and then draw towards you very slowly, you can actually see the material moving, and you can gently push up the dent from the inside. You can also use dent balls. For a trombone, it's usually like a ball on a stick. It's the same sort of thing where you put it over and then you push it up from the inside. And then also there are trombone rollers, slide rollers. You put the slide on the mandrel. It's basically like a nutcracker, but it's got 2 wheels that have convex screws in them. So you sandwich the tube and roll it across, and the roller against the mandrel will help to even out the dent.
Wow, that's really interesting. I've only ever seen dent balls used. I've never heard about using a roller.
But, each has its pitfalls. With a dent ball, you can definitely push too far and then you have an outie. With the roller, if you squeeze too hard or if you work it too much, you can flatten it out and stretch out the material, and then the tube becomes too large.
I can totally see that. How long does each method usually take? Or does it really depend?
Sometimes, if you're really lucky, 5 to 10 minutes. But often, like if you've got a dent, especially a larger dent, whatever caused that specific dent that you can see also caused the tube to not be straight anymore. So you fix that dent, and if you're lucky, pushing that back into place will bring the slide of the tube back into straightness, but oftentimes it doesn't. So then you have to spend time straightening out the tube, and then it becomes sort of a chain of, okay, I fixed this, but now this has to be adjusted.
I've heard slide alignment compared to chewing a bike wheel. You fix one thing, and now something else is just a little bit off. The good news, though, is that when it is fixed, well, that's a good feeling.
That quick repair is always the gift.
When a student accidentally damages their slide, is there anything they can do in the moment to avoid making it worse? Or is the best option to just give it to a repair person?
Yes, a teacher, this is broken, I need it fixed. For students and even for pros, primarily they should be focusing on preventative things, because to do dent work, soldering, replacing parts, you need the tools and you need the practice in order to be able to do it. Most of the time, a particular repair needs to be done correctly the first time. That's like if, somebody didn't know how to play trombone, you'd probably laugh at them if they said, "Oh yeah, I think I'll play trombone at tonight's concert." Well, you might want to practice that first. There's a story that goes around. So there's a company, a factory, they got, this big machine and it stops working. So they call the repairman. The repairman comes in, looks at it for a minute, pulls out a hammer, gives it a tap, and then it's working. He makes an invoice, gives it to the boss, and the boss says, $1,000? Why is it $1,000? You just hit it with a hammer. So he takes the invoice back, corrects it, gives it back to him, and he reads it. The invoice says, hammer tap, $1. Knowing where to hit it, $999. A lot of the work looks very simple, very quick, very easy, but you have to know where to hit it.
Very wise advice. I think students, parents, and especially band directors need to hear that because it's so easy to say, oh, I could totally do that at home. I was definitely one of those people. I tried replacing my own Spitfire spring, and it took 3 people just to finagle it back into the casing.
Springs, yeah, they're tiny little things. They're hard to work with. A lot of repairmen will have these little tubes that are bent into a U shape. They go on the ends of the springs, and then you can pinch them and move them around. And little tricks like that save you time and make the job easier. Most people just wouldn't think of that, or they have no reason to think about it. So they get into it. It's like, oh God, this is so hard. And you give it to a repairman and they're like, oh yeah, done.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Those are the kinds of things you just don't know unless you've done it a million times. This is a great segue into preventative care because avoiding damage to your instrument in the first place is obviously the ideal. What are some things that students and even professionals can do to help prevent dents and everyday wear and tear on their slides?
Well, the thing that I always told students was if the horn is not in your hand, it's in the case. I mean, a lot of the stories that I got when doing repairs was, oh yeah, I just put it on the stand and I stepped away for just a second and somebody else knocked it over. Yeah, because you left it out in the open or you put it on your chair. I hate when people do that. Always knowing where your horn is at every moment is important because things happen. Just doing that will eliminate many dents. The other thing is basic maintenance and basic preventative care, like rinsing your mouth out before you play. You don't have to brush your teeth, but try to get all the particles out of your mouth before you play. You can't always do that, but it really does make a difference. and then washing out your instruments once a month, depending on how often you play. It really depends on how much you're playing and how much you're putting into the instrument. So you might be able to get away with 2 months. You might have to do it twice a month.
Very true. When it's bath time for the trombone, do you have any slides, oils, or sprays that you recommend for students?
The truth is that any lubrication is going to be better than no lubrication. And each one has a different feel. Some people love Slidomix, some people hate it. I've used trombone, and trombone is fine because I have a slide trumpet. Each lubrication is going to have its own feel. Some people like it faster, some people like a little bit of resistance. So just try different ones and use something. Keeping your slide lube is also a preventative measure in the sense that it will help keep water off of the metal. Water in itself isn't necessarily going to be doing that much damage, but your spit, your food, any particles, any chemicals, body chemistry, keeping it lube will help to wash out all of those things. So it's preventative in a couple different ways.
Yeah, try things and see what works best for you. What's the craziest repair job you've taken on? It doesn't have to be a trombone.
Crazy good or crazy bad?
Open to interpretation.
Well, those regular pliers that you see in everybody's toolbox that have serrated teeth. We generally call those dad pliers because we know when an instrument has been worked on with dad pliers. Do you know what JB Weld is?
Not really?
It's like an epoxy. I think they use it in the automotive industry. People use all sorts of stuff to patch holes on brass instruments, and they use JB Weld, and they just sort of caked it on where the knuckle meets the valve casing, and it just looked horrible. And I think they might have actually sealed it, but oftentimes they don't succeed in sealing. In terms of good repairs, for me, a good repair is expected. They came in bad, they're fixed. One other thing that's really rewarding for me is like people who have some sort of physical limitation and they come in and they ask for a modification so that they can play an instrument. And I made a modification to this one sax. The guy was missing the last couple joints on two of his fingers. And so I made a modification so that he could operate the keys because he couldn't reach them otherwise.
Oh, that's really awesome. Okay, to wrap things up, I have one final question. If a student, parent, or band director needs help with the trombone slide, is there a trusted repair technician or shop that you recommend they visit?
Well, me, of course. Mostly it's just a matter of going out and talking with them and seeing sort of what their approach to repair is. First and foremost, it's a business. But most repairmen do what they do because they enjoy making it possible for a musician like you to just express themselves without having to fight the instrument. So go in before you have a problem, have them take a look at it, instead of, walking in for the first time saying, yeah, somebody stepped on my instrument, I need it fixed tomorrow. That's never a great way to meet the person for the first time. It's like a high pressure situation and you're really worried about, oh, I don't know this person and now I have to give them my instrument. When I was doing repair, a lot of time people would come in and it's like, I'm having a little trouble with this. It's not quite playing right. And, I'll take it, I'll look at it. And sometimes I'll just see, oh, the spring is off. And I'll take it back to my bench, do a quick thing and give it back to them, let them play it. And they say, oh, wow, it's great now. It's fixed. Yeah, okay, very good. You're welcome. Have a great day. And not charge for that sort of thing. I'm not going to nickel and dime somebody for something that is relatively simple. Most repairmen will do that because it's a nice thing to do. And also it's paperwork that you don't want to do. Yeah, get in touch with a repairman and just be respectful of their time because usually they're pretty backed up. It's funny. A lot of people will call up and they'll say, yeah, my trombone isn't working. How long will it take to fix it? And how much is that going to cost? The first thing that I always want to say is, well, can you hold a trombone closer to the phone?
Right, obviously. Problem diagnosed in 2 seconds.
So getting in with the repairman when your horn is in decent condition, they get a little familiar with it. They have a baseline for any future repairs. And then you go from there, If you go in there and they look at it and say, you need to totally rebuild this and it's in good condition, then maybe something is a little questionable. But if they give you feedback that you agree with and that you think is reasonable, then it's probably a good relationship.
That's really helpful advice. Well, Mick, thank you for sharing your time and your insights on trombone repair, music, and life. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Bonecast, where we talk all things trombone with the people who love it most. A huge thank you to Mick Geronimo for sharing his time and stories. Music for this episode was provided by Pixabay and the Library of Congress. And of course, thank you to you, our listeners. Your curiosity and support are what make these conversations possible. If you'd like to support the show, visit thebonecast.com and be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook for behind-the-scenes content and special announcements. I'm your host, Gracie Westergaard. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.